Joining me now from her home in California is Skye Borgman. She is the woman behind the documentary that everybody seems to be talking about, Abducted in Plain Sight. If you have Netflix, you've probably seen it. If you don't have Netflix, you've likely heard about it. Skye, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I just want to go into some of the background of this documentary before we talk about what might be coming. How did you hear about this story that took place right here in eastern Idaho?
Yeah, it was the book that the Brobergs wrote, Stolen Innocence, that they self-published in the early 2000s. And one of the producers on the film, Stephanie Toby, found the book through a mutual friend of her and Jan Broberg's, and read the book and was just completely flabbergasted, didn't understand how something like this could happen, and talked to Jan and wanted to make a documentary about it. And they both approached me and said, would you be interested in coming on board? And I said, absolutely. I read the book and I was just so amazed by the book and what Jan had been through that I was absolutely willing and really wanted to tell her story.
It's one of those stories that when you see it and read it, how many people have told you, was this real?
Yeah, so many people. It's just one sort of event after another, after another, after another. And so, people have said it's so crazy it has to be real because nobody could really write something like this.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, really, just what the Brobergs really went through in this tragic ordeal.
I was surprised at how candid they were with you on camera. I believe they had discussed, especially Jan's father had discussed things that hadn't been publicly revealed before. Is that correct?
That is true. Yeah. When he talked to us about his relationship with Berchtold, he'd never really talked about that in any kind of public way before. The family hadn't really informed us about that before we came into the interviews, and we were able to find out a lot of the details through court transcripts and FBI documents. So it was really, I think for Bob especially, he knew how important his relationship with Berchtold was and had carried this incredibly heavy burden around with him for 40 years at that point. And I think it was really cathartic for him to talk about it.
So were you surprised there interviewing him that he admitted to having this sexual relationship with the man that kidnapped his daughter twice?
Yeah, I don't know if I was surprised. I think really I just felt such sorrow for him. He was so emotional in that time, and talking about it it's funny, it's in a very public way because it's on camera, but it was also a very intimate setting. It was very personal. So I don't know if I was surprised necessarily, but I was just kind of with him in this interview and talking to him about it, and how he was so transparent and so forthcoming, and I think he really knew what an important piece of the story it was. And so I think there was a lot of admiration. There was a lot of sorrow. I felt that he was incredibly brave to talk about it. I don't think I was surprised by it, though.
And then you also had her mother, who admitted to having an affair with him, and she went into some detail as well. Was there any part of this project that, as you were working on it, that really kind of took your breath away, that maybe caught you off guard or you weren't expecting?
I mean, so many things about it take my breath away, and it still continues to take my breath away, especially because this isn't an isolated story. I mean, especially like right now in this time, with Finding Neverland just coming out on HBO and seeing so many similarities between that story and our story. And so I think what takes my breath away is that this continues to happen, and that we're not talking about it in a really exposed kind of way. I think these documentaries are, but I don't know that we as a culture are doing that. And so that blindness and that sort of closed door approach takes my breath away. I think it's more common that we're willing to really admit, and that takes my breath away. But what the Brobergs told me, I don't know, I think their bravery is really what took my breath away.
And you make the point in the film, in the documentary, to talk about that the majority of children who are sexually abused, it is done by someone they know, not a stranger, not a boogeyman on the corner, but this is a kind neighbor, and such was the case here in Pocatello, who really groomed the whole family, it seemed, in a way.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think that's, I mean, when I was a kid, when Jan was a kid, everybody talked about stranger danger. And I think that's where our understanding of all of this came from. And we've now sort of, as we've moved through time, realized that the statistics are exactly the opposite of that. It's not stranger danger. It is someone that we know, someone that we love, someone that we trust that's doing the majority of the abuse. And so that was something that wasn't really known then. I think it's something we kind of have an idea about now, but I also think that people kind of feel like, this could never happen to me. I am too aware as a parent, but I don't know that people are really have had this access to someone who is such a great manipulator. And that's what I'd really like for people to kind of take away from this film, really, is to just check yourself. I know the judgment is going to come, judge, fine, let that be your first emotion, but have the secondary emotion and the third emotion or action to be just double check yourself, your kids, and the people in your kids' lives, because it's the school bus driver, it's the cop, it's the priest, it's the bishop, it's the husband or the wife or the boyfriend or the girlfriend. It's people that we know that have access to our kids, and it's people that we love that we don't suspect.
You mentioned judging. I'm sure a lot of what you're hearing, because a lot of the comments we read were judging toward the parents. How could you let this happen? How does this happen? Granted, it was the 70s in Pocatello, Idaho, but still, you spent hours with these parents. Did your opinion of them change after? Not that you would feel some sympathy for them, but yeah, maybe I could see how this did happen.
Oh, I feel sympathy for them, and I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this documentary, because I needed to figure out how this could happen. And so I did understand much better after the interviews and throughout making of the documentary how something like this could happen. And it's not easy to understand. It's a hard thing to understand, because I think it's hard to sort of have the self-reflection to look at ourselves and realize how vulnerable we all are. And I think the Brobergs have done that. I think they've been able to look at themselves a little bit. I don't think they've been able to do it 100%, because I think there's also a coping and a survival mechanism that kicks in, that it is. And Karen even says it in the film, where she says, it's too hard for them to realize. And I think we all go through that as a form of coping, that some things are just too hard to really realize the depths of darkness that are there.
How long did this take you to do, the documentary?
We finished the documentary. It took us about 3.5 years to do everything for the documentary, to do with the filming and the editing and finish up and the research. I mean, we spent quite a bit of time at the beginning and throughout doing a lot of research. And then we premiered the film in 2017, and we're on the festival circuit. And that was really critical for us, because I think the festival circuit gave us a lot of our grassroots audience, and that's who we were very interested in reaching, our sort of this very sort of base audience that could start talking about the film and have a personal connection with these audiences, because we would go to these festivals and screen the film and then have a Q&A afterwards, and the conversations that were ignited from this film were just spectacular. I mean, I've never been involved in so many sort of really amazing question and answer periods. And it really opened up people to talk about their own stories. We had people come up to us after the film and tell us about their abuse in their childhood, and that they were admitting this for the first time. So our hope with the film was always to start the conversation about child sexual abuse. And I know from the screenings we were starting those conversations. And even now, watching the firestorm that has been created on social media, you can see the conversation starting. And I also feel like you can see that the conversation is shifting from just blame to something that's a little bit more introspective. And I'm so happy that that's happening.
You premiered at the filmmakers across the film festivals. And then
Yes.
When did you find out Netflix was picking it up?
So we had talked to Netflix near the end of 2017, and they were interested, and they actually picked it up in January of 2018, but they didn't have the room for it, and the way that they wanted to program it wasn't until January of 2019. And so when we found out sort of the timing of it, I mean, I thought, let's just keep going. Let's keep publicizing it in our grassroots way. Let's keep reaching out to people on a very personal level. Let's keep just really talking to people about this film and how this can happen. And so it was really a great thing, I think, to be able to do that.
So it premieres 2 months ago on Netflix, and then
Right.
was that just like a massive barrage of interest and publicity? At least it seemed on our end, as a consumer, I hadn't heard about it till this, and then everybody was talking about it everywhere, it seemed.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, when it first premiered on Netflix, we started getting messages, and then it just picked up and picked up and picked up, and people were getting really, really interested in it. And I think it just goes to show that these stories aren't being told in a very regular kind of way. And even now, when you look at R.J. Kelly and you look at Finding Neverland and you look at these stories that are getting out there, my hope is that the way that this story has picked up and that the way that people are watching these other films, that we do start to bring some awareness.
All right, so everyone wants to know, is there going to be a follow-up? I'm sure you have a lot of footage that didn't make it into part 1. Will there be a sequel?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we're talking to a lot of people right now. We're kind of looking at what the possibilities are. And I think there are a few different ways of approaching a sequel. And, we could talk about it from terms of themes and maybe somebody else's story. We could further delve into stuff with the Broberg story. There are a lot of different paths that we're looking at, but I'm certain we're going to find the best path and be able to deliver something else to our audiences.
How would you compare this documentary to the other ones that you've done?
Well, this one, my first documentary, Junk Dreams, was really a family story about my father and I in a trip that we took up the Inside Passage to Alaska on a Chinese junk boat. And so it was a very personal journey for me. I've filmed a lot of documentaries as a director of photography that deal with a lot of women's issues, third world countries. So it's different in terms of, I think that there's this true crime element that's a little bit different that I really love, because I think there are so many issues, especially with sexual abuse and how those issues get brushed under the table. And I'd like to continue working to bring some of those issues to light. But I think all of my films have are focused around women and our place in this world and how we navigate through things and how we're sometimes ignored and how we're sometimes marginalized and sometimes how we're not. And so I'm very committed to continuing to tell stories about women and where we exist in this world.
Have you heard anything from the Berchtold family?
I've heard a little bit from Joe, but just sort of some messages back and forth. I'd love to see how they're feeling about this. I mean, I think this has got to be incredibly difficult for them as well, and I hope they're doing all right.
So we will stay tuned for what's next. Thank you very much, Skye Borgman. She is the director, producer, cinematographer of Abducted in Plain Sight on Netflix right now. And keep us posted if there's a follow-up.
I will.